He was called old school, a veteran driver who had never been late in 40 years. But when corporate fired him for 3 delays in a single month, no one asked why. Until an intern pressed play on the footage, and the truth left the entire office in tears. The rumble of diesel engines echoed across the yard as the sun broke over the horizon, spilling pale orange light across rows of trailers. Most drivers moved with the tired urgency of another long shift, but Stephen Butler took his time, as he always had. At 61, with silver hair tucked under a faded ball cap and calloused hands that had spent decades gripping the wheel, he carried himself with a calm steadiness that contrasted the rush around him. "Morning, old school," a young driver called out, half teasing, half admiring. Everyone in the yard used the nickname. Stephen still carried a paper road atlas folded neatly in his jacket pocket. He preferred writing his logs by hand before transferring them to the digital system. He never cut corners, never raised his voice, and never complained, except maybe about the new dispatch software that seemed to freeze more often than it worked. That morning, though, there was a heaviness in his step. 3 late deliveries in 4 weeks. 3 warning slips in his file. Today, Quentin was waiting for him. Quentin, the operations manager, couldn't have been more different. Barely in his late 30s, always with a tablet in hand, he measured worth in minutes saved and percentages improved. He respected numbers, not stories. For him, Stephen wasn't a legacy, he was a liability dragging down metrics. "Stephen," Quentin said sharply as soon as the older man stepped into the office. "We've talked about this. 3 delays. Corporate policies clear." Stephen stood quietly, his hat in his hand. His eyes, deep-set and weathered from years of road miles, betrayed no anger, only disappointment. "I've given this company my best," he said, voice steady. "Never once missed a run until this month. Thought maybe that would count for something." Quentin didn't look up from the tablet. "It does. And it's in your pension records. But I can't ignore policy. I'm sorry, Stephen. You're done here." The words landed like a cold thud in the room. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. Stephen nodded once, put his hat back on, and walked out of the office. He didn't pack up much. He'd never decorated his locker. A thermos, a few tools, and his atlas. By the time he crossed the yard, whispers were already spreading. At home that evening, his small house felt larger than usual. 3 years had passed since his wife, Lorraine, lost her fight with cancer. He still kept her favorite chair by the window, untouched. On the kitchen table sat a pile of bills and a half-scribbled note from his daughter. "Emily, Dad, rent's late again. I'll cover part, but if you can help this month." Stephen folded the note gently. Emily, 32, was raising her little boy on her own after her husband left. Stephen had been quietly slipping her money every month, keeping her from losing her apartment. Without his paycheck, the math no longer worked. That night, he sat at the kitchen counter staring at his atlas, the creases worn from decades of use. Every line, every faded highway number, reminded him of a story. The rookie he coached through a snowstorm in Nebraska. The night he drove all night just to make it back for Emily's high school graduation. He wasn't just losing a job, he was losing a lifetime of roads that had defined him. The next morning, the yard buzzed with its usual rhythm, but the absence of Stephen was palpable. In the mechanic bay, 2 rookies talked in hushed voices. "You hear they let old school go?" one said. "No way. For what?" "Late runs. 3 in a row." "That doesn't sound like him." Out by dispatch, the chatter was the same. Men and women who had seen Stephen patch a brake line during his own lunch break or swap loads so another driver could get home for his kid's graduation were baffled. But no one spoke up loud enough for Quentin to hear. Corporate policy was corporate policy. Meanwhile, Quentin tried to shake the lingering unease. He told himself it was the right call. One man's feelings couldn't outweigh efficiency. Yet when he walked the floor, he noticed the subtle shift. Conversations hushed as he passed. No one smiled when he gave curt morning greetings. Numbers might have been his scoreboard, but even he could feel the morale dipping. Still, he pressed on, too busy to dwell. But not everyone could move on so easily. Melissa, the HR intern, had been tasked with finalizing Stephen's termination paperwork. She was 22, fresh out of college, nervous in her new blazer, and eager to prove herself. Yet as she pulled up Stephen's file, she paused. 40 years of spotless service, glowing evaluations, and not a single complaint, until 1 month unraveled it all. It didn't sit right with her. When she signed off the file, she caught a glimpse of Stephen's final walk across the yard from the security feed. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, defeated in a way that unsettled her. "Strange," she murmured under her breath. Donnie, the night shift security guard, happened to be in the office dropping off a report. He was in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a belly that suggested more coffee and vending machine dinners than home-cooked meals. He'd always liked Stephen swapping small talk during night dispatches. "You talking about Butler?" Donnie asked. Melissa nodded. "It just doesn't add up." Donnie scratched his chin. "You might be right. That man was never late without a reason." Melissa hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Could we look at the footage from his last few runs?" Donnie raised an eyebrow. "Might be bending a rule or two. But for Butler, yeah, I'll help you." That decision, quiet and almost impulsive, would set everything in motion. While the rest of the company moved on, Melissa and Donnie had taken the first step into uncovering the truth. One that would shake the entire office, test loyalties, and eventually rewrite the very culture of the yard. For now, though, the story of Stephen Butler was just beginning to ripple outward, whispered from break room to dispatch, waiting for the moment when one old driver's quiet dignity would collide with the cold machinery of corporate policy. Melissa sat at her small HR desk, the glow of her computer screen reflecting in her glasses. The cursor blinked on Stephen Butler's file, now marked terminated. She hovered over the finalize button, but her hand stalled. Something gnawed at her. The way he had left without a word, the respect written on the faces of the older drivers when his name came up, and the silence in the break room after the announcement. It was just a job to some, but to Melissa, fresh out of college and still clinging to idealism, it felt wrong to erase 40 years of loyalty with a digital signature. "Still thinking about Butler?" a gravelly voice asked. She turned to see Donnie, the night shift guard, leaning against the doorframe with a styrofoam cup of coffee. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, his posture tired but steady. He'd been around long enough to know everyone's rhythms, and he had a knack for catching what others overlooked. "I can't make sense of it," Melissa admitted. 3 late runs after decades of being early? It doesn't add up. He didn't fight back, didn't even explain. He just left. Donnie stepped inside, lowering his voice. "You ever know Stephen to waste words? He's the type that does the right thing and keeps moving. Always figured he lived by some code none of us could write down." Melissa bit her lip, then glanced toward the security monitors. "Is there a way we could check? I mean, see what happened on those runs?" Donnie chuckled softly. "That's bending a few rules. HR doesn't usually review dashcams unless there's an accident." "Please," she pressed, surprising herself with the urgency in her tone. "I just need to know. Something feels off." He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "All right, kid. For Butler, I'll help you. Meet me in the booth tonight." That evening, the security office was dim, the hum of old monitors filling the silence. Melissa perched on a folding chair while Donnie worked the system, pulling archived footage. He clicked through timestamps until a grainy video appeared. Stephen's truck pulling onto the shoulder of a busy highway. "There," Donnie said, pointing. "That's the first delay." Melissa leaned closer. Through the shaky lens of the dashcam, they saw an elderly man on the opposite side, struggling with a walker as traffic roared past. Stephen got out of his cab, jogged across the asphalt, and gently guided the man to safety. Melissa covered her mouth. "That's why he was late? Looks that way," Donnie muttered. They queued up the second incident. This time, at a truck stop, a young woman stood crying by a minivan, her toddler wailing inside. The back tire was shredded. Stephen pulled over, grabbed his tools, and changed the tire himself, his movements practiced and calm. Melissa felt her chest tighten. She whispered, almost to herself. He didn't even know them. That's the point, Donnie said quietly. The third clip hit harder than either of them expected. Rain hammered the windshield as Stephen's wipers struggled to keep up. Suddenly, headlights illuminated a small, shivering puppy darting across the shoulder. Stephen braked, pulled over, and chased the animal down, scooping it into his arms as water drenched his jacket. The audio caught his voice as he returned to the cab, soaked and exhausted. He set the puppy on the seat, exhaled hard, and muttered, "Worth every minute." Melissa blinked back tears. He knew he'd be late. He did it anyway. Because that's who he is, Donnie said. His voice was rough, but his eyes betrayed emotion. The next day, Melissa couldn't keep it to herself. At first, she mentioned it to Kayla, a dispatcher who'd always spoken fondly of Stephen. Kayla didn't react with surprise. She just nodded knowingly. That sounds like him. He once gave up a bonus route so I could take my kid to prom. Never told anyone. By lunch, the clips had been passed around the break room. A mechanic remembered Stephen fixing a rookie's brake line during his own break. Another recalled him sharing his coffee on a freezing night. The stories piled up, small, ordinary gestures now magnified against the injustice of his firing. Someone printed a still from the puppy video and taped it to the fridge. Beneath it, in marker, they wrote, "Worth it." Quentin noticed the shift almost immediately. Productivity numbers dipped. Conversations hushed when he entered the room. For the first time since taking over, he felt the intangible weight of losing respect. When he passed the break room and saw the photo of Stephen on the fridge, he tore it down. The room went silent. Eyes followed him as he walked out, the weight of unspoken judgment pressing in. Meanwhile, Melissa felt torn between her role and her conscience. She was just an intern, barely beginning her career, yet she couldn't shake the conviction that staying quiet would make her complicit. That evening, she returned to the guard booth. Donnie was waiting, sipping coffee as if he'd been expecting her. "You're thinking about telling Quentin, aren't you?" he asked. Melissa hesitated. "If I don't, nothing changes. He'll think firing Stephen was the right call." Donnie gave a slow nod. "Then be ready. Facts won't be enough. You'll need to make him feel it." Melissa stared at the still image on the monitor. Stephen cradling the drenched puppy, whispering to the sky. Her jaw tightened. "Then that's what I'll do." The investigation had started as a flicker of doubt, a young intern's unease. But now it was spreading like fire through the office, fueling whispers of loyalty, guilt, and quiet rebellion. The truth was out there, and it was no longer just Melissa and Donnie carrying it. The entire company was beginning to see what policy had blinded them to, that Stephen Butler's delays weren't failures. They were proof of a man who still believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. And that truth was about to challenge everything Quentin thought he knew about leadership. By the end of the week, the office didn't feel like the same place. The trucks still rumbled through the yard. Dispatch screens still blinked with schedules. But beneath the routine was a quiet rebellion. Conversations died the second Quentin walked into a room. Laughter, once easy in the break room, was now replaced by murmurs and sideways glances. It wasn't just the photo of Stephen taped to the fridge anymore. Someone had added handwritten notes beneath it. "He once fixed my rig on his lunch break." One note came from a customer, mailed in after hearing the story. "This man once carried my groceries inside when the rain was pouring. I never forgot." The fridge had become a makeshift shrine, growing daily as more employees shared stories that hadn't seemed significant at the time. Now, stacked together, they painted a picture of a man whose worth was measured in kindness, not delivery metrics. Quentin noticed the tension everywhere he went. In dispatch, the younger drivers barely nodded when he gave instructions. In the mechanic bay, his questions were met with curt one-word answers. The silence wasn't loud, but it was heavy, suffocating. Numbers confirmed what he already felt in his gut. Productivity was slipping. Routes were delayed, paperwork piled up, and call-outs increased. For a man who prided himself on efficiency, it was like watching sand leak through his fingers. One afternoon, he caught Kayla, the dispatcher, lingering too long by the fridge. "Take that down," he snapped, gesturing to Stephen's photo. She looked at him, her expression calm but unwavering. "Why?" "Because it reminds us of what really matters." Quentin froze and used to being challenged so directly. Before he could reply, another voice from the back added, "Because it makes you uncomfortable." The room went still. Quentin turned and left, but the words followed him like shadows. Melissa watched it all unfold with a strange mix of fear and determination. She hadn't meant to spark a movement, but the truth had taken on a life of its own. Every whispered story, every small act of defiance, gave her more courage. Still, she knew none of it would last unless she brought it to the person who could actually change things, Quentin. Late one evening, she found Donnie in the booth again, sipping his endless cup of coffee. "It's spreading," she said. "The stories, the clips, people are angry, but it's not enough. Quentin thinks this is just a morale problem." Donnie leaned back, his chair creaking. "He's not wrong, but morale problems can sink a yard faster than any policy. The question is, are you ready to face him?" Melissa hesitated. "What if he fires me? I'm just an intern." "Maybe," Donnie said, "but sometimes the right voice at the right moment can do more than a title ever could." She stared at the monitors, the looping footage of trucks rolling in and out of the lot. Then she nodded. "I'll do it." The next day, Quentin called an impromptu meeting. He stood at the front of the break room, tablet in hand, posture stiff. "I know some of you are upset," he began, his tone clipped, "but we have policies for a reason. This yard doesn't run on feelings. It runs on efficiency. Butler knew the rules and he broke them. End of story." No one moved. The silence stretched until Kayla raised her voice. "That man gave more to this company than any metric could measure. And you tossed him out like he was nothing." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Quentin's face tightened, but before he could respond, Melissa stepped forward. "Sir," she said, voice shaking but clear, "it's not the end of the story." All eyes turned to her. She held up a flash drive. "I have the footage of all 3 incidents." Quentin's jaw clenched. "That's not relevant." "It is," Melissa cut in, surprising herself with the firmness in her tone, "because it shows why he was late. And it shows what kind of man he really is." That night, she asked Quentin to meet her in his office. He reluctantly agreed, clearly irritated, but something in her eyes kept him from dismissing her outright. She plugged the drive into his monitor. The first clip played, Stephen guiding the elderly veteran across the roaring highway. The second, him changing the tire for the young mother, her toddler reaching out from the back seat. The third, the rain-soaked rescue of the puppy. Quentin leaned forward, his hands tightening on the edge of the desk. When the final clip ended, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the computer. He rubbed his forehead with both hands, staring at the frozen frame of Stephen cradling the drenched puppy. His screen felt less like data and more like a mirror. Melissa turned to him. "You fired him for being late." But he wasn't late because he failed. He was late because he cared. For a moment, Quentin said nothing. His usual armor of efficiency and rules cracked as the image of Stephen, drenched and exhausted, whispering hope that was worth it, replayed in his mind. He swallowed hard. "Leave the file with me," he muttered. Melissa gathered her things, her heart pounding. As she left, she knew something had shifted. Whether Quentin admitted it or not, the truth had pierced through the numbers. The office revolt had started with whispers and photos, but now it had a voice. And for Quentin, it wasn't just about one driver anymore, it was about the soul of the company. The question was whether he had the courage to face what he had done. The following morning, Quentin sat in his office long before dawn. The glow of the monitor still replayed the frozen image of Stephen Butler, soaked in rain, holding a trembling puppy against his chest. Quentin had watched it half a dozen times through the night, each replay digging deeper into the wall he had built around himself. Numbers, charts, efficiency, those had been his shield. But no graph could erase the look on Stephen's face in that single frame. Weary, burdened, but utterly human. Finally, Quentin admitted to himself that he had been wrong. Finding Stephen wasn't easy. He hadn't left a forwarding address with HR, and his phone went unanswered. It was Donnie who finally gave Quentin a lead. "Try the hardware store down on Jefferson," the guard suggested. "He's been picking up odd jobs since you cut him loose. Too proud to ask for help, but that's Butler." Quentin drove there himself, his polished company sedan out of place among the dusty pickups and dented vans. He found Stephen in the back, loading bags of gravel into a customer's truck. His cap was pulled low, his shirt damp with sweat. He looked smaller somehow, though his back was still straight. "Stephen," Quentin called. The older man glanced up, surprised, then went back to his work. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said evenly. "I owe you an apology," Quentin began. The words felt awkward, foreign. "I fired you without understanding what really happened." Stephen dropped the last bag, dust rising around his boots. He wiped his hands on a rag. "You don't need to say it. Policy's policy. That's the world now." Quentin shook his head. "It shouldn't be. I saw the footage, Stephen. All of it. You weren't late because you failed, you were late because you cared. And I punished you for it." For a long moment, Stephen studied him, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his cap. "So why are you here?" "To ease your conscience." Quentin swallowed. "To make it right. I want you back. No conditions, no penalties. Just back where you belong." Stephen let out a slow breath. "I've driven these roads longer than you've been alive. I've seen managers come and go, each one chasing numbers like they're the only thing that matters. If I come back, it's not just me returning. Something has to change." "What do you mean?" Quentin asked. Stephen's voice was firm. "You can't measure everything with spreadsheets. You can't punish drivers for being human. If you want me behind the wheel again, you've got to fix the culture." The challenge hung in the air. Quentin nodded slowly. "Then help me. Show me how." When Stephen walked back into the yard a week later, heads turned. Some drivers grinned openly, others clapped him on the shoulder as if welcoming a soldier home. The photo shrine on the fridge had grown so crowded with notes that the door barely closed. Quentin called a meeting. This time his tone was different, less clipped, more deliberate. "I made a mistake," he began. The room went quiet. "I punished a man for doing the right thing. That ends today." He gestured to the board behind him, where a new sign hung, "The Stephen Rule." Beneath it were 3 simple words, "Going the extra mile." From now on, Quentin continued, every act of decency, every choice to help someone even when it costs time, will be recognized here. This yard will not punish compassion. It will celebrate it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kayla, the dispatcher, clapped. Donnie followed. Soon the whole room erupted in applause, the kind that carried relief as much as approval. Stephen stood quietly off to the side, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But in his chest, something eased. Weeks passed and the change became real. Drivers started leaving sticky notes on the new board, helped a rookie secure his load, stopped to check on a broken-down van, carried extra water to a stranded motorist. The board filled fast and morale climbed. Productivity followed, not because of fear, but because pride had returned to the yard. Emily noticed it too. One evening, when Stephen slipped a few bills across her kitchen table, she frowned. "Dad, you can't keep doing this. You need to save for yourself." Stephen smiled faintly. "Don't worry. Things are different now. I've got more than just a job back. I've got a reason again." She hugged him, her voice breaking. Mom would be proud. The story of the Stephen Rule spread beyond the yard. Other depots called to ask about it, curious how one driver's firing had turned into a company-wide change. Quentin, once obsessed with metrics, found himself repeating Stephen's words at meetings. You can't punish people for being human. One late evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the trailers in gold, Stephen sat in his cab again. The wheel felt familiar under his hands, the hum of the engine steady and alive. He glanced at the small photo taped to his dashboard, Lorraine, smiling at him from a summer long past. "Still out here," he murmured, starting the engine. And as the rig rolled out of the yard, Past the break room where his picture still hung, Stephen Butler knew he hadn't just come back to work. He had etched his legacy into the miles themselves, proof that dignity, kindness, and loyalty travel further than any stopwatch ever could. This story reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness carry the greatest weight. If you were in Stephen's shoes, would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you were moved by this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that prove humanity still matters on the road. See you in the next video.